Good morning. I'm Joyce Hawes, Vice Chairman for the Republican State Party of Pennsylvania. I'd like to welcome all of you to our headquarters here at 112 State Street. We are very proud of our headquarters that we have redone within the last 2 years. And those of you who are guests here after the event, we would love to give you a tour if you would like to stay for it. We thank all of you for coming. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to be able to meet our national chairman and also our senatorial candidate. And at this point, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our national committee woman, Christine Toretti.
Thank you, Joyce. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us at our headquarters to discuss President Obama's massive takeover of our healthcare system and its effect on Pennsylvania businesses. President Obama signed this 2,471-page monstrosity 2 years ago. In fact, Obamacare's second birthday was last Friday. But was the president celebrating? No. Did Bob Casey, who enthusiastically supported its passage in 2010, release any congratulations? No. The truth is that Obamacare is so unpopular, Democrats avoided talking about it on the 2-year anniversary of the law. Or the fact that this so-called achievement is now being ripped apart before the United States Supreme Court. But Pennsylvanians didn't forget. And we're going to make sure voters remember that during a recession, President Obama and Senator Bob Casey decided to pass a bill that has increased the debt, hurt small businesses, and made health care more expensive for families. Thankfully, taxpayers have had Republican advocates in Pennsylvania government who have taken the shadier bits of Obamacare to task. Just yesterday, the Pennsylvania Senate approved the Individual Health Care Freedom Amendment that would amend our Constitution to prohibit Pennsylvanians from being required to obtain health insurance coverage or from being penalized for not doing so. Governor Corbett, as Attorney General, led Pennsylvania into a lawsuit along with 27 other states challenging Obamacare's individual mandate. We need that same type of leadership at the federal level. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who has been working tirelessly to make our party strong and prepared for one of the most important elections we will ever face. Reince Priebus is our national chairman. He is the former chairman of the Wisconsin State Party. He is, in short, one of the most successful volunteer party operatives we have ever seen in the GOP. I can tell you this because I work with him on a daily basis. I have had the honor to travel with him across our nation as his finance co-chair, and I see him in action. I also spend many days in the office at the RNC in DC, and I see how he has transformed that entity into the most effective and efficient functioning entity we have ever seen in the history of the GOP. We are so proud to have Reince with us today. And we are going to build a broad coalition of not just Republicans, but Democrats, Independents, and anyone else who wants to join our fight to get new leadership in Washington, D.C. And that is our ultimate goal. 20 in 12. Delivering all of our 20 electoral votes to the nominee in 2012. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to our national chairman, Reince Priebus.
Thank you, Christine. And I appreciate everybody being here, both the folks back there and the reporters here this morning for this press conference. I want to thank Christine Toretti, the National Committee Woman of Pennsylvania, not just for doing a great job over the years for this party and the RNC, but for me in particular as a national co-chair of our finance department at the RNC. It's no doubt that we had some challenges coming in the beginning of the last year, but things have been turned around, and Christine's been a big part of that. Bob Asher as well in that same regard in helping us in fundraising throughout Pennsylvania, and a great state party chairman here in Rob Gleason. Just a real serious party operation here in Pennsylvania that went from almost all blue to all red. Certainly there's a lot of folks that helped make that happen, but Rob's certainly been a great captain of the ship here in Pennsylvania. I'm honored to be joined by U.S. Senate candidate Steve Welch and Jean Barr of the Pennsylvania Chamber, and it's a great pleasure to be here at the Pennsylvania GOP headquarters. This week, the Supreme Court is hearing and has heard arguments on one of the most consequential cases of our time. 3 days of argument. It's an enormous amount of time for the Supreme Court to give a one single case in this country before it. But the American people and Pennsylvanians have already reached their verdict. A full 2/3 of Americans across the country want the court to block all or part of Obamacare. It's unconstitutional and it must come to an end. Obamacare is an undeniable failure by the president's own standards, by his words. And we're going to show you an ad that we're airing throughout Pennsylvania when I get done. But by his own standards, Obamacare has been a failure. Insurance premiums will skyrocket. Millions will lose employer-based insurance. Unelected bureaucrats will deny seniors care. Taxpayers will foot a $1.7 trillion bill on day one. It's bad for business and it kills jobs. This is why President Obama didn't mark the second anniversary of what was supposedly his proudest achievement. Today, we're here to stand with Pennsylvanians who don't want, don't like, and can't afford Obamacare. We're on the side of the majority that says no to big government health care and yes to real reform, liberty, and freedom. We will make sure that voters in Pennsylvania and across the country remember Obamacare in November so that we hold Democrats accountable for it on Election Day and we win Pennsylvania for our GOP nominee. I'm going to sum it up for you in one line before turning it over to our next speaker. But I want to show you the video, and I want to sum it up this way. Prescription pads belong in the hands of doctors, not in the hands of bureaucrats. Plain and simple. And let's see.
Barack Obama promised to cut healthcare costs.
We will bring down premiums by $2,500 for the typical family.
But it didn't happen. 6 in 10 Americans are seeing their premiums rise. The average cost of a family policy is up to $1,300. And a key part of Obama's healthcare takeover will cost $100 billion more than promised. Higher costs for patients, higher costs for taxpayers. Another broken promise by Obama. The Republican National Committee is responsible for the content of this act.
Thank you, Reince, and thanks for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. You know, we talk a lot about firing President Obama from the White House, but there's another Democrat who simply has to go. Bob Casey forgot when he went to Washington. Rather than being the moderate Democratic voice he campaigned as, he became President Obama's lapdog, and over the past 4 years has voted with this extreme liberal president 98% of the time, including abdicating his so-called pro-life pledges to vote for Obamacare. We need a strong conservative voice in the U.S. Senate who can stand up to the president and fight for pro-jobs, pro-growth policies that benefit Pennsylvania families. That person is Steve Welch. The only endorsed Republican candidate in this race has vowed to repeal Obamacare if he were elected to the United States Senate. This, among his many other conservative positions on important issues, makes Steve the ideal candidate to challenge Bob Casey this fall. Please allow me to introduce to you Steve Welch.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Steve Welch. I'm the endorsed candidate for the United States Senate. Thank you, Chairman Priebus, for joining us here in Harrisburg, and thank you for your great leadership day in and day out within the party. Thank you, Committeewoman Toretti and Mr. Barr for joining us in this issue that affects all Pennsylvanians. I am not a career politician. In fact, I'm a Penn State graduate, an engineer, and a successful entrepreneur who just started 3 businesses here in Pennsylvania. And And I got involved in politics because I saw Washington was broken. I saw career politicians pass bill after bill that drove up costs here in the United States, made American companies less competitive, and pushed American jobs overseas. And Obamacare is a perfect example of this flawed thinking in Washington. 2 years ago, President Obama, and with the full support of Bob Casey, signed this massive government takeover into law. This week, Obamacare's constitutionality has been questioned in the Supreme Court. These grim events are a reminder that President Obama and Bob Casey have hurt our healthcare system and hurt our economy. As we examine Obamacare 2 years later, we see a lot of things are different than they were originally sold as. Number one is the cost. Obamacare's cost is outrageous. And in fact, the recent nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office changed the price tag. They increased it, almost doubled it, from roughly $940 billion to $1.76 trillion over 10 years. Even worse, they estimate that almost 800,000 jobs could be lost because of this bill. We're already struggling. We're struggling under a massive debt of $15 trillion. Obamacare spending is something we simply cannot afford. Second, aside from this massive expansion in cost, it's estimated that Obamacare could cost 20 million Americans to lose their employer-based health care insurance. And 6 million seniors could lose their prescription drug plans under the new Medicare rules. That's a healthcare disaster. It's this massive spending and regulatory burden that is directly killing jobs here in Pennsylvania. Alcoa, U.S. Steel, Allegheny Technologies, all Pennsylvania-based businesses that have reported multi-million-dollar charges and costs due to compliance with Obamacare. Rather than spending their precious resources on expanding their businesses and hiring individuals, they're spending it adhering to government regulations. Beyond that, beyond the enormous cost, beyond the loss of private insurance, beyond the flawed constitutionality, I think it's important to remember the worst part, the absolute worst part of Obamacare is it puts government in between patient and doctor. This is not the American way, and we cannot stand for it. President Obama and Bob Casey were wrong when they forced this bill upon us, and they are wrong today to continue to support this flawed legislation. Let's make one thing crystal clear. There is a better way. When I ran Mitos, we listened to our employees. We sat down every year and figured out what was best for them, what we could afford and what would meet their needs. And this allowed us to be competitive in the marketplace. Top-down regulations and mandates from Washington, like Obamacare, remove this local control of our healthcare system and do nothing to drive down costs. Pennsylvanians know we need a new direction. They know we need to repeal Obamacare. We need real healthcare reform, not some one-size-fits-all concoction from Washington, D.C. Some of the reforms are simple. They're market-based solutions, allowing people to buy healthcare insurance across state lines. They're getting rid of the abuses in the legal system. Unlike Bob Casey, when I'm in the United States Senate, I will fight to repeal Obamacare. And I will deliver common sense reforms that reduce healthcare costs to every Pennsylvanian, and that is something every Pennsylvanian deserves. Thank you very much.
We already know that Obamacare's mandates and regulations put added costs on struggling businesses, thus making it harder for businesses to hire new workers and grow the economy. I'll now introduce someone who can just describe just how devastating these effects will be on Pennsylvania businesses. Gene Barr serves as the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, a group that is dedicated to promoting business-friendly and pro-growth policies through the Commonwealth. Please join me in welcoming Gene Barr.
Christine, thank you. I appreciate being here with one of my board members, the chairman, Steve, Joyce. Great to be here with all of you. We came out here to talk a little bit today about this issue and its concern to the business community. I want to first mention, as many of you know, the Chamber is the largest broad-based business advocacy group in Pennsylvania. This is a huge issue, and we've been engaged with it for quite a while. But today I want to focus on just a couple of things. I want to lay aside the constitutional issues for a couple of reasons. One, they're being adequately debated right now in Washington. Two, I'm not an attorney, and my constitutional law courses in college were a long, long time ago, so I'm not going to talk about those. What I am going to talk about a bit is what impact this does have on the business community and what we anticipate that impact to be. I'm going to focus just on two or three things. As I talk to members here in Pennsylvania and I communicate with my colleagues across the U.S., there are significant concerns with how this will work out going forward. For example, we have done a real disservice from our perspective from the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act by enacting that, by calling for and really inhibiting job growth, one, and putting a tremendous burden on future generations and setting up a scheme where we're almost certainly going to put an increased burden on businesses. The inhibition on job creation is this. Because of the provision in this act that states at 50 employees and above, you are subject to the provisions of the act. From our talking to our members, if you have 45, 46, 47 employees, you're going to really have to think twice about whether or not you're going to add those few employees onto your payroll and subject yourself to the provisions of this act. What we don't need at this point in time is more uncertainty in the hiring place, more uncertainty over employing our people. That is not something that we need to do in this country. Two, clearly what we've looked at when we look at this act, it's arguably a financial house of cards. When you look at all the pieces that come into play, and some of them have already been taken out and rightfully so, for example, the 1099 requirement, that was an unfair, unrealistic subjection of business to real regulatory red tape. That was pulled. But the reality is, this act counted on a significant amount of money coming back in to pay for some of this healthcare costs. That's gone. The Independent Payment Advisory Board, thankfully, for those members who pulled that, we're grateful for that. But again, more money coming back in. The long-term care. Again, another piece that was in addition to the double counting that was so abundantly documented in this, pulled again, but again, as this house of cards comes out, you can see from our perspective, this is not going to work. From a business perspective, Steve had touched on this, the fact that many people will lose their employer-sponsored health care. It's abundantly clear that what will happen is, as we move fully into this implementation, what will happen is businesses will have to make a very critical choice. When you look at what the penalties are versus what businesses now pay for their employees' health care, they're going to have to be tough choices that will be made. And those tough choices will unfortunately result in people being sent into the exchanges. That's just the actual reality. Businesses are going to have to make those financial choices as they move forward. There is no if, and, or buts about that. So that will happen. From our perspective, regardless of what happens on the constitutionality, we need significant changes to this act. We need real health care reform. We need real control of health care costs. And finally, there was a particular piece, all of you remember the comments that former Speaker Pelosi talked about, and of course the one that most people fixate on is that we have to pass this bill so you can read it. I think one of her other videos was even more disturbing and unfortunately says, in my case, a lot for some of the underpinnings of this act. When she was speaking to a group of artists and musicians, and she said, well, we created this act so that you could all leave your jobs, go off, and just kind of work your avocation, whatever you feel like doing. Well, I don't believe the U.S. people thought that this act was designed to subsidize hobbies for people. So let's do something that really makes sense. Let's do something that controls healthcare costs. Let's do something that doesn't subsidize hobbies. And let's find something that will control healthcare costs while not inhibiting job growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. We appreciate you being here. As you can see, the stakes are very high this year, but Republicans throughout Pennsylvania are excited to start working towards defeating Obamacare and defeating President Obama and Senator Casey this fall. We look forward to victory for our entire endorsed Republican team: Steve Welch for the U.S. Senate, Dave Freed for Attorney General, John Marr for Auditor General, and Diana Irie Bond for Treasurer. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank our Executive Director, Mike Barley, who is working above and beyond the call of duty to ensure victory and protecting not only Pennsylvania, but the United States for the future. Thank you, Mike. And we will be around for a while to answer any follow-up questions you may have. Thank you all for coming today.
Yeah, questions?
Mr. Chairman, how do you respond to the response from the left that your criticism and Republican criticism of Obamacare is predicated on partisanship, given that two of your presidential candidates have in the past advocated reforms to health care similar to this, and that the nut of the plan originated with the Heritage Foundation?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to speak for the Heritage Foundation, but I do think we have something called the 10th Amendment in this country that allows states to do as they wish under their own laws in this regard. But the question for this case and for this court is whether or not it's constitutional under the separation of powers doctrine and the 10th Amendment as to whether or not the federal government can mandate that individuals ought to buy private insurance? Can the United States of America, under the Constitution, force individuals to purchase, whether it be insurance, whether it be food, whether it be clothes? I mean, this is a test of the separation of powers, the 10th Amendment, and the Commerce Clause. And I think that the reason the court's giving it 3 full days is that it will likely be one of the most important cases that the court's ever heard in many, many decades.
Mr. Chairman, one of the morning arguments yesterday focused on the severability of the act, whether you could take the individual mandate out and still leave provisions of the act standing. Given that there's some popular provisions, such as allowing students of the age 26 to remain their parents' policies, do you believe that some portions of the act should stand, or should you throw out the entire act and start from scratch?
Well, I mean, I'm going to let our 9 Supreme Court justices make that determination. I think severability is obviously, my guess is that's where the court is arguing right now, likely amongst each other, as to the severability of the bill. I can't, as a lawyer, see how the court keeps this bill intact. I think they should, and they will, send it back to the Congress, and if there are provisions that Republicans and Democrats can come together on that are reasonable provisions and good for America, obviously they're going to do that. I think what you're seeing, though, here in the Supreme Court is an affirmation that this president and his policies are not squaring with the concepts and ideas that have been laid out in the Bill of Rights and James Madison and America, and that this will be a referendum on liberty, freedom, the Constitution, and how big Obama world is going to get. Barack Obama is not your daddy's Democrat. He is not a Bill Clinton Democrat. He is not a Kennedy Democrat. He is a Democrat that views America under the same lens as Spain, France, and some other European Union nation. But this is America founded on liberty and freedom, and Obama world is being put to the test now by the Supreme Court. Yes.
Without a mandate, I'd like Steve to also speak to this, and maybe Gene if you'd like to. Without a mandate, how do you get at the free rider problem, which is that people who have insurance and companies who have insurance, part of that bill is paying for people who do not. The intent of the mandate was to get at that problem so that people who choose not to buy insurance aren't subsidized by people who do buy insurance. How do you fix that without a mandate?
I'll answer quickly, and I'll let Steve answer. But first of all, states have programs in place all over the country for people who can't afford insurance, people who are destitute, people who are poor, people who need a hand up. I mean, no one's opposed to making sure that people who need help get help. The issue here is, in the United States of America, founded on liberty and freedom, can the federal government mandate across state lines that people must purchase health insurance whether they want it or not? That's the fundamental question for this country. And I'll let
Yeah, I think the chairman hit on it, but I do think it's important that Republicans, we believe there's reforms that are needed within our healthcare system, and in many ways it has been broken. We haven't had systems that have been designed to drive down cost. I think every American would like to see every other American have opportunity to have health insurance. The key to that is to reduce costs, and the key to doing that is to create a competitive market in which consumers use their purchasing dollars to have choice that drives down cost. I mean, that works in every single marketplace in the world. It will work in healthcare as well. I think what's key is getting to the principle of making sure people have opportunity to have healthcare coverage is to make sure it happens at the state level. I mean, the brilliance of America has been, whether it be education policy or economic policy, we literally have had 50 different experiments going on at all times. And from that, you see certain states and do things that work, and people tend to move there. States that do things bad, people tend to leave there. But it's that experimentation that actually gets to the best results. There's nobody, Barack Obama, nobody in the Senate is all-knowing. That's why the market works well. That's why decentralized systems in which we have experimentation go on, that's what will get you the best results in the end.
Well, but just to stick with that, what you're saying is that pre-Obamacare we did a good job of dealing with free riders?
I think there's a lot of things we are doing right in our healthcare system. I think there's clearly areas we need improvement. You know what the average life expectancy in this country was in 1900? 48 years old. It's almost 80 years old today. Okay, we have a medical industry, and especially here in Pennsylvania, both pharmaceutical and medical device, that has done wonders for healthcare in this country. That's not to say it's not perfect, and I think that's why the key is to make sure that we drive down costs so everybody has access to that system.
Pete, can I address your first question, because it is a good one, and I don't know how you do that, but the reality is the current law doesn't either. Here's why it doesn't. Because if you are a healthy 25-year-old and, you know, he or she's going to sit there and weigh whether or not they want to buy health insurance, and the reality is that the penalty for not buying is significantly less than what you're going to wind up paying for a health insurance policy right now. There's nothing to stop somebody as they're on their way to the hospital in an ambulance by saying, oh, and, you know, by the way, I need health insurance, so sign me up, you get taken care of, you drop it the next day or the next week when you're done. That defeats the entire purpose of insurance, whereby you pay over a long period of time, those dollars go into the system, and then when you need it, you have it. But the reality is, the way that this is structured, because of the penalties versus the cost, this one doesn't work either.
Last question, go ahead.
I just wonder if Mr. Welch is a small businessman, and Jean could speak to the issue of providing health insurance. For instance, how many of your members do provide health insurance, and did you provide health insurance?
Yeah, we have a good example. We were a manufacturing company in biotech industry. These were good jobs here in Pennsylvania. We covered 100% of medical for every employee. We had a 100% match of 7% on 401k. And you know, I will tell you, what's frustrating is you watch over the last decade. I started my first company in 2001. Something has drastically changed in this country. I mean, we have a government that is putting burdens on businesses that we weren't a decade ago, and making it harder for people to get companies up and off the ground. And I'm very concerned that if we don't make some drastic changes in Washington very quickly, we will continue to destroy the small business environment in this country. And let's be candid here. Small businesses create 75% of net new jobs. Small businesses have led almost every seismic innovation shift in this country in the last several decades have come from small, innovative businesses. And so many of the laws that we're passing in Washington are putting undue burden on our small businesses at the expense of entrepreneurship in this country.
Thank you all. Oh, I'm sorry.
Ours very significantly. Part of the problem we have with this act is that employers over the years have developed some innovative ways of getting at and reducing healthcare costs. Because of the fact that this is going to establish a floor, from our view, this is going to take out a lot of those innovative programs and projects and products that have been offered, because it will standardize things across the board, so we are very much concerned about that.
I'd like to thank you all for coming and let you know that our speakers will be around for a while if you'd like to chat with them individually. Thank you.
Thank you.